For the past 2 years, we've been bombarded with one message: Russia bad, Ukraine good. The Western media and political establishment have crafted a simplistic, almost comic book-like narrative where Vladimir Putin is the villain and the Ukraine's government, led by Zelensky, is the noble defender of freedom and democracy. But as with so many global conflicts, reality is far more complicated than the headlines would have you believe. Let's start with some context. This war didn't begin in February 22, as many would have you think. The roots go back to 2014, where Ukraine's democratically elected government was overthrown in what many argue was a Western-backed coup. The new Western-leaning government took an aggressive stance against pro-Russian regions in the east, sparking a brutal civil conflict. Russia's annexation of Crimea wasn't some random land grab, it was a strategic and defensive move in response to what it saw as NATO encroachment on its borders. Now, let's talk about NATO. We've been told that NATO is a defensive alliance. But if that were true, why has it expanded eastward since the 1990s? Despite promises to the contrary, reality is that Russia has a legitimate security concern, ones that have been completely ignored by the West. Imagine if China or Russia started building military bases in Mexico. Would the US stand idly by? Of course not. Yet when Russia reacts to NATO forces creeping closer to its borders, it's painted as the aggressor. And then there's the issue of Ukraine itself. Zelensky has been hailed as a hero of democracy, yet his government has banned opposition parties, shut down critical media, and cracked down on dissent. Not exactly the beacon of free speech and liberal values we've been sold, is it? And what about the documented cases of neo-Nazi elements within Ukraine's military, particularly the infamous Azov battalion? These inconvenient facts are swept under the rug because they don't fit the narrative. Of course, none of this is to say that Russia is entirely innocent. Putin's government has its own authoritarian tendencies, and war always brings human suffering. But to pretend this is a one-sided conflict, with all the blame falling on Moscow, is disingenuous at best and dangerous at worst. The real question we should be asking is who benefits from this war? And the answer is clear. Western arms manufacturers, geopolitical strategists pushing for global dominance, and a political class that thrives on keeping tensions high. The Ukrainian people, they're just being used as pawns in a much bigger game. So before we swallow the mainstream narrative whole, let's ask ourselves, are we getting the full picture or just the version that suits those in power? Let me know in the comments and follow for more news, views,
The United States engineered a coup in 2014 in Ukraine and installed their puppet leader Zelensky. And then Zelensky had one task given to him by his American overlords, which is make sure that Ukraine breaks each and every one of Russia's red lines and say that they are going to be joining NATO, which will give Russia no other option but to invade. The Americans and Europeans knew that there was no way Ukraine would ever win a war against Russia, but they wanted two things out of this Russian invasion. Number one is they thought they could weaken Russia militarily by pumping hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weapons to Ukraine from both the United States and Europe. And number two would be to increase the sanctions by the United States and Europe against Russia in order to isolate them economically and weaken them economically as well. But the CIA heavily miscalculated Russia's military strength and they absolutely crushed Ukraine. The war also had a tremendously positive effect on Russia's economy as well. Putin masterfully transformed Russia's economy into a military-based economy, and now their economic growth, is higher than that of the G7 nations. That's when the United States decided this is a lost cause, stabbed Zelensky in the back, and are now carving up Ukraine to be divided between Russia and the United States.
Well, Zelensky's meeting at the White House does not seem to have gone to plan. From all reports, it seems to be an absolute disaster. He has been shouted at by the Vice President, shouted at by Donald Trump, the President, tried to argue with them. Not good. And I have to say, I am not a Zelensky fan whatsoever. I find him abominable, but I feel sorry for the guy. I mean, look at how his path has fallen. Look at how far down they're treating him now. It is not good. And now Donald Trump is saying that he's considering suspending all military aid to Ukraine effective immediately, which basically means that's it for Ukraine. Now, Zelensky was there to sign some paperwork that gave America rights to the rare earth minerals that are found in Ukraine. Apparently, he hasn't done that. That wasn't able to happen because they just had a great big argument instead. I'm keen to know what other people think of this. For me, it's just interesting to see how far this guy has fallen from grace. He was the poster boy for America for so long under Biden. He was, rolled out in his military combat gear and heralded as this, defender of love and light and democracy. And now he is being treated like the dirt on people's shoe. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm no Donald Trump fan either, and I don't think the way that Donald Trump or J.D. Vance spoke to him was correct, but I can understand where they're coming from. Where has all the money gone? What has happened to the $350 billion that have been given to Ukraine? What is going on with the army? Have they got enough men, etc., etc., etc.? It's very strange to be in a position where someone like Donald Trump is the only one who is saying sensible things like, we're trying to stop this war, we're trying to stop this from turning into World War III. But yeah, interesting days for Zelensky. Interested to know what other people think.